Wihelm Tell, the sturdy hunter from Uri, morphed into the spirit of defiance, an archetype of uncompromising liberty. His quiet strength, compelled to act by a father's love and a man's dignity, had become the timeless symbol for all who yearned to break the chains of tyranny and carve their own freedom from the bedrock of oppression. The light of the midday sun struck the cobbled square of Altdorf, but its warmth found little purchase there. A chill, more of apprehension than of mere autumn air, clung to the corners of the buildings, seeped from the very stones. Guards, clad in the sombre livery of the Hapsburgs, stood rigid and unyielding, their halberds glinting with an unfriendly gleam. Their eyes, perpetually scanning, seemed to miss nothing and forgive less. At the very heart of the square, where men usually gathered to trade wares or gossip, stood a solitary pole. Upon its peak, impaled with almost brutal simplicity, sat a ducal hat. It was a fine thing, crafted of felt, adorned with a plume, and seemingly innocuous. Yet a decree had been issued, carried on the breath of power, whispered through the market, and enforced by the bailiff Albrecht Gessler's iron will. All who passed through Altdorf Square must bow to the hat. It was not merely a symbol, it was the emperor made manifest, an extension of his authority, demanding obeisance from every soul beneath its shadow. The townsfolk moved with an unfamiliar gait, shoulders slightly hunched, eyes fixed on the ground or darting nervously towards the guards. When they reached the invisible line drawn around the pole, their heads dipped, a universally practiced, almost imperceptible nod of submission. Mothers tugged at the hands of their children, urging them forward, their faces strained with a silent plea, "Do not provoke." The air hummed with a tension that was less about a coming storm and more about a persistent, suffocating pressure, like the weight of a stone slowly grinding bone. The rhythmic thud of sturdy boots on cobblestones announced his approach long before he emerged from the narrow lane leading from the lake. Wihelm Tell. He carried a hunting bow, well-worn leather straps moulding to his calloused hand, and a quiver full of feathered arrows swayed gently at his hip. Beside him, his young son, Walter, skipped with the boundless energy of youth, his gaze wide and curious, innocent of the shadowed fear that gripped the adults around him. Tell walked with an easy stride, the unhurried confidence of a man entirely at peace with his place in the world, accustomed to the silence of the high mountains and the candid gaze of the sky. His face, framed by dark, wind-tousled hair, bore the marks of sun and exertion, lines around his eyes, speaking of a life spent observing distant horizons. No scowl marred his brow, no revolutionary fire burned openly in his eyes, only a quiet strength, a natural rectitude. He was no politician, no rabble-rouser, but a hunter, a father, a man whose dignity was as inherent as the breath in his lungs. His mind, at that moment, was likely on the deer he'd tracked that morning, or perhaps the warmth of the evening meal awaiting him and his family. The hat, the guards, the hushed fear of the square, these were not the landscapes of his usual thought. As he stepped fully into the square, his eyes, accustomed to seeking out the slightest movement in the forest, registered the unusual spectacle. The pole, the hat, the cluster of guards beside it. He saw the townsfolk performing their strange, unwilling curtsy. A flicker of something crossed his features. Not anger, not yet, but a faint bewilderment, an almost amused disbelief. Bow to a hat? It was an absurdity, an affront to reason. His hand instinctively tightened on the grip of his bow, not in preparation for conflict, but as a familiar comfort, a grounded anchor in the face of something so utterly senseless. He noted the guards' scrutinizing stares, felt the weight of the crowd's unspoken tension. Walter, too, paused, his small hands still in Tell's, his bright eyes fixed on the hat, then on the bowed heads of the other people, then back to his father. a question forming on his innocent face. Tell's gaze swept across the scene. He saw the fear in the eyes of his countrymen, the resentment held in check by the glint of Austrian steel. And then he looked at Walter. To bow for him would be to teach his son that a man's spirit could be bought, his dignity surrendered without a fight to a mere symbol of oppression. It would be to acknowledge a false authority, to debase himself not for a king or a cause, but for a piece of felt on a stick. It was a rejection of his very being, a humiliation he could not, would not, inflict upon himself or impart to his child. It was an instinct, pure and unburdened by ideology. His chin lifted almost imperceptibly. His steps did not falter. He walked forward, directly across the square, his gaze clear, unwavering. The pole, the hat, the guards, they were simply obstacles in his path, not masters of his will. His head remained high, his shoulders unslumped, his stride even. Walter, still holding his father's hand, walked beside him, his gaze now fixed upon his father's composed face. The boy did not bow. A collective intake of breath swept through the square. The hushed whispers died. All eyes were on the hunter from Uri. "Halt!" The sharp command ripped through the stillness. It came from a burly guard, his voice laced with the arrogance of delegated power. "You, hunter!" You passed the symbol of his majesty and offered no respect. Tell stopped. He turned slowly, his expression devoid of panic, though a subtle tightening around his eyes hinted at a deep, quiet resolve. "I bow to God, and to no man, nor to a hat," he stated, his voice calm, carrying a clear, resonant timbre across the silent square. He did not shout, nor did he puff himself up. It was simply a statement of fact, an unadorned truth. The guard's face flushed a deep red. Contempt twisted his lips. "Insolence! Do you know who mandated this decree? It is Bailiff Gessler himself. Do you mock the authority of the emperor?" Tell said nothing, his steady gaze meeting the guard's, unblinking. He stood as a mountain stands against the wind, unyielding. Suddenly, a commotion erupted from the side of the square. A heavy, iron-clad carriage, drawn by two black horses, thundered into view, its wheels crunching on the cobbles. The crowd parted as if struck by a lightning bolt, scattering like autumn leaves before a gale. From within, a figure emerged, tall and imposing, clad in rich, dark fabrics, a heavy silver chain adorning his neck. His face was sharp, predatory, his eyes cold and intelligent, reflecting no warmth. Albrecht Gessler. A hush, deeper than before, fell upon Altdorf. Gessler, his presence radiating an almost palpable aura of cruelty and absolute power, surveyed the scene. His gaze, accustomed to instilling terror, fell upon Tell. He noted the hunter's unbowed head, the defiant posture, the bow in his hand, and the small boy at his side. A slow smile, devoid of mirth, spread across his thin lips. So, Gessler's voice was smooth, a silken thread of menace. "We have a defiant one, do we? A man who deems himself above the emperor's will, above the laws of the land?" He gestured towards the hat with a dismissive flick of his wrist. "You refuse to honor a symbol of authority." "I honor what is worthy of honor," Tell replied, his voice still level, yet carrying a quiet steel. He did not flinch under Gessler's piercing stare. "A hat is but cloth and feather. My loyalty is to my land, and my conscience to God." Gessler's eyes narrowed. This was not the expected cowering, the fearful apology. This man spoke with a quiet dignity, a natural authority that rivaled his own. It infuriated him. Such unyielding spirit, if left unchecked, could ignite a fire. "Conscience, you say?" Gessler chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. "A peasant's conscience. Tell me, hunter, are you not the famed marksman of Uri?" The one who boasts he can split an apple from 100 paces with his crossbow? A murmur rippled through the crowd. This was common knowledge in the region, a point of local pride. Tell simply watched Gessler, his face unreadable. Indeed, Gessler continued, his smile widening, a rare skill. Such talent should not go to waste, nor should such insolence go unpunished. No, striking down a man such as you would be too simple, too quick. The people must learn the cost of defiance in a way they will never forget. He paused, letting the silence build, letting the dread spread through the square. His gaze dropped to Walter, who still clung to his father's hand, his small face now etched with fear, eyes wide as a trapped fawn. "You have a son, you see," Gessler purred, his voice suddenly sickeningly sweet. "A fine boy. How old is he?" "My son has done no wrong," Tell said, his voice now tight with a desperate edge. His grip on Walter's hand visibly tightened. The hunter's calm had shattered, replaced by the primal fear of a father watching a predator circle his young. "Oh, but he is part of your insolence, is he not?" Gessler's eyes gleamed with malicious delight. "He walked by your side, refusing to bow, mirroring your defiance. He shall be part of your lesson. Bring forth an apple and a crossbow." A guard scurried away, returning moments later with a polished red apple and a heavy, well-maintained crossbow. Not Tell's own, but one from Gessler's armory. "Now, marksman," Gessler announced, his voice ringing with theatrical flourish, "you shall demonstrate your legendary skill. The apple shall be placed upon your son's head, and you, Wihelm Tell, shall shoot it off." The world seemed to tilt for Tell. The air left his lungs. His gaze snapped from Gessler to Walter, then back to Gessler, his eyes blazing with a desperate, unspoken plea. "No, I beg you, not my son. Punish me as you wish, but spare the boy. He is innocent." Gessler merely smiled, a cold, unyielding curve of his lips. "It is the price of your defiance, hunter. Refuse, and both you and your son shall die here, instantly. Succeed, and you shall both live, for now, and the people shall know the consequences of challenging the Emperor's will." The guards roughly pulled Walter from Tell's grasp. The boy cried out, terrified, reaching for his father. Tell lunged forward, but he was held fast by two guards, their hands like iron clamps on his arms. He watched, helpless, as they led Walter to a point some distance away, positioning him under the hat pole directly in the square's centre. The apple, red and round like a drop of blood, was placed firmly upon his head. Walter stood rigid, his small chest heaving, his eyes fixed on his father, tears streaming down his face. The crossbow was thrust into Tell's hands. It was heavier than his own, unfamiliar. His fingers trembled, not from fear for his own life, but from a terror so profound it threatened to paralyze him. This was not a test of skill, it was an act of torture. His personal desire to protect his loved ones, his instinctual rejection of humiliation, had led him to this precipice. "Be swift, hunter," Gessler's voice cut through the haze of Tell's fear, "and aim true. Remember, one mistake." He let the threat hang in the air, thick and suffocating. Tell raised the crossbow. His arms felt like lead, but his hunter's training, years of discipline, began to assert itself. He took a deep, shuddering breath. He forced his mind to quiet, to focus, to narrow the world down to the sight before him. The boy, the apple, the impossible task. He saw not his son, but a target. This was the only way. To see Walter was to break. He sighted down the barrel, his vision blurring, then sharpening with terrifying clarity. Every fibre of his being screamed to drop the bow, to rush forward, to fight, but Walter's life hung by the thin thread of his aim. The square was utterly silent. The sun beat down, deceptively warm. The only sound was the thumping of Tell's own heart, a frantic drum in his ears. He drew the string back, clicked it into place. His finger trembled near the trigger. He closed his eyes for a fraction of a second, a silent prayer, a desperate plea for guidance. Then his eyes snapped open, fixed on the red apple. Time seemed to distend, stretching into an eternity. He exhaled slowly, steadily, a hunter's breath. The trigger finger, once trembling, became steady, sure. Thwip! The arrow, a blur of wood and feather, hissed through the air. A faint, sickening thunk echoed across the square. The apple, neatly cleaved in two, tumbled from Walter's head. The boy stood frozen for a moment, then gasped, a sob of pure relief escaping his lips. He ran immediately towards his father, burying his face in Tell's leg. A ragged cheer rose from the crowd, quickly stifled by the harsh glares of the guards. Tell knelt, wrapping his arms around his son, burying his face in the boy's hair, tears finally blurring his vision. He had done it. His son was safe. Gessler watched, his face a mask of furious disappointment. His cruel game had backfired. The people, silent moments before, now stirred with a burgeoning hope, a spark ignited by Tell's impossible feat. "By what devilry did you achieve that, marksman?" Gessler demanded, his voice tight with barely suppressed rage. It was an impossible shot. Tell stood, his arms still around his trembling son. His eyes, no longer filled with fear, now held a cold, unwavering fury. He reached inside his tunic, pulling out a second arrow, its fletching identical to the one that had split the apple. "Had the first missed," Tell said, his voice low, clear, and utterly devoid of all previous restraint, "and harmed my son, this second arrow, by the grace of God, would have found its mark in your heart, Bailiff Gessler. Of that you can be sure." The declaration hung in the air, a silent thunderclap. The crowd gasped, Gessler's face contorted, his pale skin flushing. This was more than defiance now. It was an open threat, a declaration of war. The hunter, driven by personal love and primal instinct, had crossed a line, transforming from a simple man protecting his family into something far more dangerous, a symbol of righteous anger, a harbinger of rebellion. "Seize him!" Gessler roared, his voice cracking with unbridled fury. "Seize him and bind him. He shall rot in the dungeons of Kusnacht. His spirit will break there, and the people will learn what happens to those who dare threaten the Emperor's appointed hand." Guards surged forward, their halberds converging on Tell. He made no move to resist, his gaze still fixed on Gessler, a promise of vengeance searing in his eyes. He had saved his son, but his defiance, born of personal dignity, had now irrevocably set him on a path of confrontation, a path that would intertwine his fate with that of all his oppressed countrymen, leading him from the quiet solitude of the mountains into the storm of a nation's awakening. The myth of Wihelm Tell, the reluctant hero, had truly begun. The guards, a phalanx of steel and leather, closed in. Tell stood motionless, a solitary peak amidst a storm of human rage. His arms were wrenched behind him, ropes biting into the flesh of his wrists, then his ankles, until he was a bound figure, defiant posture the only vestige of his freedom. Gessler, still trembling with an impotent fury that belied his power, stalked around him, eyes like chips of glacial ice. "To the lake!" Gessler shrieked, his voice echoing across the now hushed square. "He sails for Kusnacht, to the deepest, darkest hole in my dungeon, and let the people witness the swift hand of justice." A grim procession formed. Tell, propelled by the guards, moved through the parting crowd. Faces, a canvas of fear and suppressed hope, watched his passage. His gaze remained forward, fixed on an unseen horizon, perhaps already envisioning the icy depths of Lake Lucerne or the crags of the mountains that had always offered him solace. The journey to the lake's edge was short, marked by the rhythmic tramp of soldiers' boots and the distant cry of gulls. The air grew cooler, carrying the scent of fresh water and impending change. At the water's edge, a small, sturdy skiff waited, rocking gently on the dark surface. Its single sail was furled, its mast a skeletal finger pointing towards a sky that was beginning to bruise with distant purples and greys. Gessler, his scarlet cloak flapping in the nascent wind, gestured curtly. Tell was hoisted unceremoniously into the boat, his bound form settling awkwardly amidst the rough planks. 4 rowers clutched their oars, their faces grim, avoiding the gaze of both the prisoner and the governor. Gessler himself stepped aboard, followed by 2 of his most trusted guards, their hands never straying far from their sword hilts. The boat pushed off, leaving the shore behind, a silent testament to unchallenged authority. The initial rowing was steady, the oars biting into the water with practiced rhythm. The lake, vast and inscrutable, stretched before them, its surface a shifting tapestry of dark blues and greens. High, above, the peaks of Uri and Schwiz, usually symbols of steadfastness, now seemed to brood, their summits shrouded in an ominous mist that crept lower with each passing minute. Gessler, seated opposite Tell, watched the bound man with a predatory satisfaction. "The mountains have given you strength, hunter," he sneered, his voice thin against the growing wind. "But the waters tell. The waters will claim your spirit, and the dungeons of Kuznacht will claim your bones." Tell offered no response, his eyes scanning the horizon, noting the subtle shifts in the clouds, the way the wind whispered across the water's surface, ruffling it like an agitated beast. His silence was not submission, but observation. He felt the lake, sensed its ancient moods. A cold breath of air swept down from the passes, carrying with it the scent of pine and a metallic tang that spoke of distant storms. A low rumble, like a giant clearing its throat, echoed from the mountain heights. The sky, which had been merely bruised, now turned a sickly, bruised purple, streaked with veins of angry black. The wind whipped up, first in playful gusts, then in sharp, violent slaps. The boat began to pitch and roll with increasing intensity. Whitecaps, like hungry teeth, began to appear on the water's surface. The rowers, accustomed to placid crossings, exchanged nervous glances. Their strokes grew less regular, less powerful. One of the guards, clinging to the gunwale, swallowed hard, his face paling. Gessler, for all his bluster, instinctively pulled his cloak tighter, his eyes darting towards the churning waters. Then the true fury of the storm broke. A deluge descended, blinding sheets of rain that lashed down with an almost physical force. Thunder cracked overhead, a deafening explosion that seemed to tear the very fabric of the sky. Lightning forked, momentarily illuminating the roiling expanse of the lake, revealing mountainous waves that rose and crashed with terrifying power. The small skiff was no longer a vessel, but a toy, tossed and spun in the grip of a colossal unseen hand. The rowers cried out, their oars ripped from their grasp by the violent lurches. The boat spun, shipping water over its sides. Panic flared in the eyes of the guards, their trained discipline crumbling before the overwhelming might of nature. One let out a whimpering cry as a particularly large wave slammed into the boat, sending spray high into the air. Gessler, too, was consumed by terror. His face, once imperious, was now contorted into a mask of abject fear. He clung desperately to the mast, shouting incoherent commands that were snatched away by the gale. Water swirled around his feet, icy and unforgiving. The dungeon of Kuznacht seemed a distant, unattainable fantasy. Death, cold and immediate, was upon them. "We are lost!" One guard shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at a jagged rock face that loomed out of the swirling mist, directly in their path. The boat was being driven relentlessly towards it, its destruction imminent. In the midst of the chaos, only Tell remained outwardly calm. His eyes, though wet with spray, were clear, assessing every tilt of the boat, every surge of the water, every shift in the wind. He saw the terror in Gessler's eyes, the desperation of the guards. He saw the unyielding rock and knew the precise moment it would rend their boat apart. A desperate thought clawed its way into Gessler's mind, overriding his desire for revenge, overriding everything but the primal urge to survive. His eyes, wild with fear, fell upon the bound figure of Tell. It was whispered in the cantons that no man knew the waters of Lake Lucerne like Wihelm Tell. He was of these mountains, of these waters. "Untie him!" Gessler shrieked, his voice raw, barely audible above the storm's roar. "Untie him! He's the only one. He can save us." The guards hesitated, their fear of Gessler momentarily eclipsed by their amazement at the order. This was the man Gessler had sworn to break, the man they were transporting to a living hell. Yet the waves crashed higher, the boat pitched lower, and the jagged rocks loomed closer. Survival, for now, superseded all else. A trembling guard, his face ashen, fumbled with the knots. Tell's hands were numb from the bindings, but as the ropes loosened, sensation flooded back, a tide of resolve displacing the chill. His ankles were freed next. He stretched, a subtle, almost imperceptible movement, and then, in one swift, fluid motion, he was on his feet, amidst the roiling chaos. He moved to the tiller, his grip firm, his body swaying with the boat's violent movements, not against them. He barked an order, a crisp, commanding sound that cut through the storm's din. "Lower the sail! Now!" The remaining guard, still terrified, scrambled to obey. With the sail down, the boat became less of a wind-whipped leaf and more responsive to the tiller. Tell, his eyes narrowed, peered through the driving rain, searching for a landmark known only to him, a slight indentation in the treacherous rock face, a tiny ledge. He wrestled the tiller, his powerful shoulders straining against the force of the waves. The boat, against all odds, began to respond, turning its prow away from the direct path of collision, riding the crests, plunging into the troughs, but always, inexorably, moving towards a specific point. Gessler watched, mesmerized, a flicker of something akin to awe replacing the terror in his eyes. The boat skimmed past the monstrous rock, so close that the spume from the crashing waves lashed across their faces. Then, with a final, desperate surge, Tell guided the skiff towards a low, shelving slab of rock, known thereafter as Tell's Plat. It was a mere whisper of solid ground amidst the raging waters, a place only a mountain man would know. With a powerful thrust of his foot, Tell launched himself from the boat. It was a leap of faith, a defiance of gravity and the storm. His boots found purchase on the wet, slippery rock. He landed, agile as a chamois, and immediately pushed off with his foot again, sending the now rudderless boat, with Gessler and his remaining guards, spinning back into the churning maelstrom of the lake. He stood for a moment, silhouetted against the dark, furious sky, a lone figure of defiance. He scanned the boat, ensuring his escape, then turned. The storm, though still raging, seemed to recede from his presence. His eyes, now focused, swept the sparse rock, locating his prized crossbow and quivers that had been stored precariously in the boat's prow. They had tumbled out as he leapt, carried by the surging water towards his sanctuary. He retrieved them with swift, practiced movements, a hunter reclaiming his tools. The boat, meanwhile, was at the mercy of the tempest. Gessler, shrieking in impotent fury, watched as Tell vanished into the dark, rain-swept landscape. The governor's salvation had delivered his doom. Tell scaled the rock face with the ease of a goat, his muscles rippling under his soaked tunic. He knew this land, every hidden path, every shadowed crevice. He moved with purpose, a silent phantom in the storm-lashed landscape. His destination was the Hohle Gasse, the Hollow Way, a narrow defile near Kusnacht, a place where the towering cliffs squeezed the path into a constricted throat, a perfect ambush point. He moved swiftly, the storm now his ally, masking his movements, muffling any sound. He knew Gessler would not remain on the water, not willingly. The governor, if he survived, would be consumed by a rage far more potent than his fear. He would pursue. Hours later, as the storm began to subside, leaving behind a dripping, mist-shrouded world, Tell reached the Holgasse. Moss-covered rocks rose steeply on either side, creating a dark, tunnel-like passage. It was a place where light struggled to penetrate, where shadows clung like ancient memories. He found a suitable perch amidst the rocks, overlooking the narrow path. His crossbow was ready, a single bolt knocked, its point glinting dully in the dim light. This was not a hunt for sustenance, but for justice. The air was heavy with anticipation, broken only by the drip of water from the leaves and the distant mournful cry of an unseen bird. He waited, a statue carved of resolve, his breath even, his heart a steady drum. Then a distant sound, the squelch of boots on mud, the muffled clatter of armour. They were coming. Gessler. The sounds grew louder, closer. A horse whinnied nervously. Then, through the swirling mist and the dripping foliage, they appeared. First, a vanguard of guards, their halberds held loosely, their shoulders slumped with exhaustion. Behind them, mounted on a weary horse, came Gessler, his face pale and haggard, his scarlet cloak now a sodden, mud-splattered mess. His eyes still held the glazed desperation of one who had stared into the abyss, but beneath it, a cold, vengeful fire burned. He was alive, and his fury would be boundless. As Gessler's horse entered the narrowest part of the defile, directly below Tell's hidden position, the hunter's finger tightened on the trigger. The crossbow twanged, a sharp, deadly note that pierced the damp silence. The bolt flew, a whisper of death, true and unwavering. It struck Gessler in the chest, tearing through his sodden cloak and piercing his heart. He gasped, a choked, guttural sound, his eyes widening in disbelief, then glazing over. He slumped forward on his horse, his hands involuntarily reaching for the fletched shaft protruding from his breast. With a final shuddering breath, he toppled from the saddle, landing with a sickening thud in the muddy path. His guards cried out, a mixture of shock and terror. They looked around wildly, but their assailant was unseen. Swallowed by the enveloping mist and the oppressive shadows of the defile, all they saw was their fallen governor, the symbol of tyranny, struck down by an invisible hand. Tell, his task completed, melted back into the mountains, leaving behind only the cold promise of change. The body of Gessler lay in the dirt of the Hohlegasse, a tyrant's broken effigy. The news spread like wildfire, carried by the wind, by hushed whispers, by the desperate hope of a people long oppressed. The man who had dared to defy, who had dared to strike down the oppressor, was a symbol now, a legend forged in the crucible of tyranny. The blood in the Hohlegasse was not just Gessler's, it was the ink that wrote the first defiant lines of Swiss freedom. From the valleys and the peaks, from the cantons of Uri, Schwyz and Unterwalden, a cry began to rise, not of fear, but of righteous fury. The myth of Wihelm Tell, the reluctant hero, had blossomed into the seed of a nation's awakening, igniting the spark that would set the Alps ablaze, forging the old Swiss Confederacy in the crucible of liberty. The wind, once a mere whisper through the Alpine passes, now carried a roaring chorus. From the valleys of Uri, Schwyz and Unterwalden, The cry of righteous fury swelled, a wave crashing against the fortresses of the oppressors. Gessler's death was not just an act of vengeance, it was the signal, the single spark that ignited a long smouldering resentment. The people, silent for too long, now found their voice, a collective shout that echoed off the granite peaks. In Altdorf, the imperial fortress of Swing Uri, the symbol of Hapsburg dominion, became the first target. Farmers, woodsmen and shepherds, their hands accustomed to plough and staff, now gripped axes and pitchforks. They moved with a synchronized purpose, their movements driven by years of pent-up rage. The camera saw the fortified walls, then the determined faces, then the first breach. Stones crumbled, timbers splintered, and the Hapsburg banner, so long an arrogant proclamation, was torn down and trampled into the mud. Elsewhere, across the canton, other fortresses met similar fates. The castle of Sarnen in Unterwalden, the stronghold of Rotsburg, and the keep of Kusnacht in Schwyz. One by one, the symbols of foreign rule crumbled. It was as if the mountains themselves, long silent witnesses, had decided to lend their strength to the people. Tell, the man whose arrow had pierced the heart of tyranny, melted further into the legends he was inspiring. He was seen, fleetingly, in the vanguard of an assault on a particularly obstinate redoubt, his crossbow an extension of his purpose. But his presence was more spectral than physical, a guiding spirit rather than a commanding general. He was the whisper of courage in the ear of the faint-hearted, the glint of defiance in the eyes of the oppressed. His personal vendetta had blossomed into a communal revolution. The cantons, distinct in their valleys and dialects, found common cause in his audacious act. They swore an oath, a solemn bond in the Rutley meadow, to stand as one, to cast off the yoke of foreign masters and forge a new destiny. The old Swiss Confederacy, born of a single act of defiance, was now a nascent reality, its foundation cemented not by treaties, but by shared blood and a singular pursuit of freedom. Yet Tell, the man, receded. He did not seek power, nor did he crave the accolades of the crowd. He was a force of nature, an inevitable response to unbearable pressure, and once the balance was righted, he returned to the quiet anonymity of the mountains, leaving the true building of the nation to those elected to lead. But the myth he embodied refused to stay confined to the high valleys. It spread like the thaw after a long winter, flowing down rivers, carried by merchants and minstrels, echoing through market squares and hushed taverns. His story transcended the specific injustice of the apple and the specific tyranny of Gessler. The image of a common man pushed to the brink, striking down an arrogant despot with a single, precise shot resonated far beyond the nascent confederacy. His crossbow, once a hunter's tool, became the weapon of any oppressed people. The second arrow, hidden but ready, became the potent symbol of reserved fury, a final lethal retort to unchecked power. His defiance became a universal blueprint for revolution, a testament to the idea that tyranny, no matter how entrenched, could be toppled by the courage of a single individual inspiring collective action. He was no longer just Wihelm Tell of Berglin, the reluctant hero of Uri. He became the universal archetype of liberty, a blank slate onto which successive generations could project their own struggles for freedom. His tale, stripped of its specific historical context, became a timeless narrative, inspiring peasants in distant lands to rise against their lords, revolutionaries to defy empires, and the downtrodden to believe in the possibility of self-determination. The myth of Wihelm Tell continued to grow, eternally potent, eternally relevant, a testament to the enduring power of freedom and the indomitable spirit of humanity. And centuries later, the essence of Wihelm Tell endured, transcending the rugged Alps and the tyranny of a single bailiff. His story, told in hushed tones and defiant shouts, became a universal language of resistance. For the French revolutionaries, Tell was not just a hunter, he was the spirit of popular sovereignty, urging them to overthrow the feudal aristocracy and forge republics. To the Russian dissidents of the 19th century, he was a beacon in the shadow of Tsarist autocracy, a silent call to defiance. In 20th century Spain, as republicans clashed with monarchical and fascist rule, Tell's legend became their rallying cry, a testament to the common man's power against oppressive hierarchies.